Hey everybody, I'm Bill. I'm an alcoholic and I'm not dead. That's a good thing. And most of us should be, shouldn't we? Uh, my sobriety date is March the 27th, 1985. I don't know about you, but that impresses the hell out of me. That's 40 years. Who knew we'd be here this long, huh? I see some older folks on this screen. You probably are pushing that number or over it. And uh, what a life we have. What a life we have. You know, one thing, I just got back from the international, went up to the international in Vancouver, and then we went on a cruise up into Alaska. My wife's going to be 35 years sober on Friday. I've done a good job sponsoring her and bringing her along. And we just have a great life together. And boy, you know that when you're at the international convention and you just feel that energy. And for the whole time I've been sober, I've always been able to tap into the energy in Alcoholics Anonymous. When the pandemic hit, I found I could do it on a computer screen as well. Not as good as live, but it's close. You know, I mean, we're still together, aren't we? We're together. And I believe this technology and the pandemic has given the world more access to Alcoholics Anonymous than it's ever had. And I don't think it's going away, nor should it. I think this has been a net positive thing for all of us. Um, the transition into it was difficult, though, wasn't it? It was interesting. We don't, people say we don't like change. That's not true. We like change. We like. We don't like change. We don't like. You know, we're like anybody else. It's not just alcoholics. And um, I got to AA when I was 37 years old in 85. I was on my second marriage. I had a second set of two children. My daughter was 3 years old, and my son was 4 months old. He was born on Christmas Day, 1984. And he was just a few months old in March of 85. And I was up all night. You ever been up all night? I don't know about you, but there's really not many things that are more depressing than when that sun comes up. And you know it's going to be another miserable day in a long, long line of miserable days. And like most of you here probably know, the party was long over. You know, I'm an extrovert, I'm a party kind of guy, I'm a bar drinker, and I'm in my living room all night alone, watching religious television, taking notes. you know, and the reason I was up all night is there's certain spiritual truths, and one of those spiritual truths is alcohol plus money equals cocaine. The reason God gave us cocaine is so that alcoholics could drink more. That's what it's for. And I know there's people that just do cocaine all by itself, and there's a separate program for those weirdos, but my cocaine use was an aspect of my alcoholism. And I'm from the 60s. We were laughing about this before the meeting. I'm a child of the 60s, and I was in San Francisco during the Summer of Love. I was there, and I'm really sorry I missed it, but I was there, and I was busy doing what we do. And but at 37, I was up all night one more time, and I'm sick. I've got hepatitis C, and they didn't call it that then. They called it non-A, non-B. They said it wasn't that bad. They were wrong about that. And I had cirrhosis, and I had no idea how bad it was. I was bloated. I was upwards around 320 or 30 pounds. And I'm just a fat, big, sweaty mess. And nobody's knocking on my door asking if can Bill come out and play. You know, that isn't what was going on in my life. And my little daughter, the 3-year-old, got up and she came out in the living room. She was happy that Daddy was up. And she crawled up in my lap, and it just broke my heart. Just broke my heart. And I think we talked about that last night. I don't know what was really going on. I just know that it was the end. So far, so good. It was the end. And I think I knew that I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a father. I wasn't a son. I wasn't anything. Nobody gets to AA with a whole lot of self-esteem. It's hard to feel good about yourself when you live the way we do. And and I made the phone call. I made the phone call, and I called my mother. And sometimes they're the only one left, you know. And this is a woman. By the time when I made that phone call, she'd been in Al-Anon for 30 years. My dad got sober in 1954. And when he died in 99, he was 45 years sober. He got sober in March also, March the 26th. I'm the 27th. And interesting. He was 37, I was 37. And Al-Anon people, they're organized, prepared, and focused. And she got there inside of a half an hour before I changed my mind, before I take a nap and change my mind. Because we do that, don't we? And it just seems like we change our mind. We don't have any awareness of the obsession and the compulsion and the mental twist of alcoholism. We don't know about that, do we? I just thought I was a moral weakling. And she came and got me, and she checked me into a place in Costa Mesa, California called Starting Point. And I spent 35 days in there. While I was in that place for 35 days, they made me wear a sign around my neck. I had to make the sign. We made it in crafts. It was a little rectangular piece of cardboard with a string that went through it, and it said, "I am not a counselor." Because evidently there was some confusion about that. And at the end of that 35 days, they let me out. They just let us out, don't they? Like we're okay. Like go forth, multiply, you know? And where do we end up when they let us out? The Serenity Improvement Group. We end up in Alcoholics Anonymous, the world's aftercare program, you know? And we are the counselors here, aren't we? We're the counselors. You stop and think about this. I've been married 3 times. I've been to a lockdown mental institution twice, and a few jails, and people ask me for relationship advice. I give it to them. I figure, hell, you can't hurt them, you know, if they're in AA. And so the inmates are running the asylum here. Isn't that interesting? That's really true, isn't it? We certainly have a lot of experience, you know. There's a lot of experience. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a lot of wisdom. And what is wisdom? Wisdom to me is experience, number one, having experience and enough intellect to be able to express the experience. And that's what we do, is we tell each other our story, don't we? I had a 40th birthday party here in March. Big turnout. It's a big number. We had a big turnout. We have a big backyard back here. There must have been 250 people there. You offer free food, alcoholics show up, man. You know, it was a nice sunny day in Southern California and had a big crowd. And we had a few people. My sponsor showed up, and I've had the same sponsor for 40 years. I should have fired him several times, but he needs me now, you know, and I make him look good. And my daughter came. My daughter is, she's a school teacher, married, got a couple of kids, not an alcoholic. She's very pretty. She's a tenured school teacher, very successful, got a successful marriage. I'm very, very proud of this woman. She's a woman. I can't call her a girl anymore. And she very much wanted to talk at my birthday. She's much like her dad. And she got the little PA system, and she got on there and she looked at everybody and she says, "I've been sharing my father with you self-centered weirdos all these years." You know? And everybody roared. A lot of the guys there watched her grow up, you know, watched her grow up. One day I walked through the living room. She was about 10 years old, and she was on the phone. And I hear her say on the phone, on the regular old phone. Remember the old phones? I remember her saying, "Well, have you done your inventory?" And I stopped and I said, "Who are you talking to?" And she says, "Owen." And I said, good, keep it up. And I just kept walking. It's like, you know. Another thing she said, which to the point of what we do in AA, she says, my father never told me what to do. He just told me what he would do. That really touched me when she said that. One of the guys I've sponsored for a long time said, she really knows you because that's exactly how I know you, just like that, you know? Isn't that interesting? I think that's so interesting. I'm just overwhelmed with a lot of gratitude. You know, it's hard to talk about anything else, really. My life, I've been transformed. I suspect many of you on here, it's in any AA meeting you're in, whether it's online or live, you're in a room full of people, most of whom are very conscious of the fact that their life has been saved. There's an energy around that that's very real. And the longer I'm around here, the more sensitive I am to that energy, the more grateful I am. And there's a lot of humor about it all, isn't there? I got a whole bunch of 40-year coins. I got a whole box full of them, really nice ones too. And you don't give many of those out. I don't know what I'm going to do with all of them. Maybe I could sell them, put them on eBay, you know. And one guy, I had a poster for my birthday, and the guy made up, one of the techie guys made up this poster with a picture of me, and he had that embossed on the coin, a very nice coin. And on the other side of the coin, it says, I'm Bill C, God damn it. I just think you got to be able to laugh at yourself in the persona, don't you? It really helps. It really helps. I think AA does a really good job at helping us laugh at who we think we are. Not who we really are, but who we think we are. Because we're human. We all have personas. And the spiritual path, you're kind of forced to look at that and see it for what it really is. I love the line in the book where it says, he wants a certain reputation, but knows he doesn't deserve it. It's like, and so two things happened to me when I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous that day. This was a Friday, and it was April of '85, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And the day I got home, I got in my car and I went to an AA meeting. I called a guy up and he said he would meet me there. And I'd never been they brought people in, but, I had never gone to Alcoholics Anonymous on my own. I went with my parents in the 50s, but, this was different. And I wasn't very welcome at home. Things weren't good at home. My life was a real disaster area. My wife and the two kids were looking for a place they could go. She just didn't have the kind of family that could take her in. And as far as she was concerned, it was pretty much over. She just couldn't afford to leave. So it wasn't very happy at home. So I got in my car and I drove to this Alano Club in Hermosa Beach. And it was a Friday night meeting, and it was a meeting that was called the Gong Show. Now, I don't know about you, but when I got to AA, I didn't think it was going to be fun, right? I didn't have any idea. Did you? Did you think, oh, this will be fun? This is going to be interesting. It'll be fun. We end up in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's really nowhere else to go for most of us. And I showed up at this meeting and all the Harleys were parked out front, which I wasn't expecting. And the room was packed. It was Friday night and everybody was dressed up trying to hook up down at the Alano Club, right? Rocky Hudson was the secretary and he was like almost a stand-up comic. I figured this guy must be president of AA. And the room was raucous. Nicknames are flying around, and where would an AA meeting be full like that on a Friday night in the summertime? I wasn't expecting that. So there was no room to sit down. So I was standing in the back and I didn't feel part of because I wasn't. I didn't know anybody. Literally didn't know anybody. And the first lucky thing happened to me. I just liked it right away. I heard the music right away, where we laugh at the tragedies and we cry at the successes. One guy got up to the podium to share and they hooted at him so much he just sat back down. Clearly a very loved man in the room. And this was all very lighthearted. It was funny. And I caught myself and I started laughing. I mean, I got the joke. That's how you catch alcoholism. If you show up to AA and you start laughing, They don't laugh at stuff like this down at the Rotary Club, you know? I mean, this is an odd place with an odd sense of humor. And you've got to be able to get it, to get the humor in AA. And I got it that first night. I started laughing and I was not expecting you. I didn't think it was going to be funny. I didn't think it was going to be fun. I didn't think it was going to be interesting. And I drove home that night and I said out, I think out loud in the car, I said, this may not be so bad. And I went back the next night just to find out what the hell's going down there on at that place. After a couple of weeks banging around going to meetings, because it's about the only place I felt halfway comfortable. I don't know if you remember when you first got sober, they took away our medication. Everything was odd. It was uncomfortable. Everywhere I was uncomfortable. And I knew I was going to drink again, and I really didn't want to. I was very tired, but I'd always drank before. I didn't have any expectation that I was going to really stay sober. Anthony DeMello, one of my favorite guys, he says, you don't want to wake up, you just want relief. And we know how to get relief, don't we? We say it stops working, but that's not totally true. I know I can get some relief. It doesn't last very long anymore. The fun was all over, but I can get some relief. So after a couple of weeks, I asked this guy for help. You were all telling me you got to get one of these sponsor things, and I saw this guy every meeting. It seemed like every meeting I went, he was there, and he was 5 or 6 years, 6 years sober, I think, I found out later. And he looked like he knew everybody, which is probably true. He knew everybody. The people that run Alcoholics Anonymous are between 5, 6, 7 years sober, maybe even 3, because they've got some time. They're not new anymore. They know everything. They've worked the steps and they're more than willing to tell everybody. That's who runs it. And that's what this guy was. This guy's lit up, and he's 46 years sober and he's still kind of like this, nothing seems to have changed. And I asked him for help. And I remember one of the things he said to me, he said several things to me that night outside the Alano Club. And one of the things that I remember specifically, he said, I want you to go home and read the doctor's opinion, make notes in the margin of what you agree with and what you don't. Be at my house Thursday at 5 o'clock and we'll discuss it. What's the bottom? We talk about hitting bottom here. We talk about hitting bottom in sobriety. I've hit bottoms, big bottoms in sobriety. What's the bottom? I think what the bottom is the collapse of the alibi system, right? Because we have a story about why we live the way we live. The alcoholic life seems like the only normal one. How do we pull that off? You can't be an alcoholic and not know who they are. And I have a story about who they are. My first inventory was the entire federal government and specifically the Department of Motor Vehicles. Who the hell are they to tell me whether I can drive or not? I have resentments, justifiable resentments. I'm angry, and I have a story. And I think what happens when the bottom comes is the alibi system collapses. And for some reason, when that guy told me to do that, I just did it. I was out of argument. And I'm an AA now. There's not, what are you going to argue about? And some still do. Some still argue. But I went home and I read my assignment and I showed up to that guy's house, that stranger. I don't think I knew his last name. Knocked on the door and he let me in. We sat down in his living room and he didn't trust me that I'd read the doctor's opinion and he had me sit there and read it to him out loud. Now, that man and I have done Alcoholics Anonymous around a good part of the world and across the United States over the years. We've done workshops, we had lead retreats, we've done things, and a lot of things we've done together. And one of the things we did for years is we did sponsorship workshops. And rule number 1 when you're sponsoring people, make sure they read the book. Don't trust them, read it with them. Maybe it'll help you out. It's like, if I have to read War Fever in that New England town one more goddamn time, I think I'm going to blow my head off. Now I'm doing it on Zoom, like in places like Russia. Who knew that was going to happen, And I sat there and I read that to him. Each week I went to his house and I read another chapter in the book. And we worked the steps. He worked the steps with me. At 6 months sober, I did an inventory. And after I did that inventory, after I read that 5th step to him, he said to me, is there anything that you haven't written down that you're not going to tell me that you should tell me now? And I told him. And I've been to mental institutions. I spent 2.5 years in group therapy at one time. I've been gestalted and rolfed and primal screamed, and I told this man stuff that I'd never told anybody, right? Why do we do that? I don't think there's any rational explanation, but there is identification, isn't there? There's something that happens that just tells us that this will be okay. That for some reason this guy will understand. He won't chastise me. He won't judge me. And I think that's part of the mystery. And he told me, when you go home today, when you walk through the front door of your house, think of the guy that walked through that front door 6 months ago compared to the guy that's walking through it today. And I actually did that. And I had what I believe is my first conscious spiritual experience. I hadn't been 6 months sober since I was 15 years old. You know, 6 months, 6 months. That's a long time. That's forever. And I stood on my front porch and I thought about that guy that walked through there, and it struck me. What came to me, the experience I had, was an understanding that transcends the intellect. It was much more of a feeling than a thought, that it's going to be like this now, that old life, whatever that was, is over. That's remarkable. March the 27th, 1985, something touched me. Something outside myself, something outside my egoic self touched me and changed the course of my life. And it's never been the same since. That's what happened to Bill Wilson. You can argue about his white light experience and what that might be, but you can't argue the fact that that man never returned to his old life ever for the rest of his life. It changed. That's what's happened to us. Now, some years after that experience of 6 months sober, I ended up, through a series of circumstances, sitting with this Indian guru, a man by the name of Ramesh. I was very impressed to be sitting with this guy on my spiritual search, on an atheist search for spirituality, right? That's probably the most interesting journey you can ever be on. And what an atheist is specifically is someone who creates a God and then doesn't believe in it. And sponsors say things like, well, I don't believe in the God you don't believe in either, which is confusing because I want to argue about it. And he was not arguing with me about it. So my friend and I, Wayne, went on a spiritual search. Baba Ram Dass was still around back then talking. And I'm an old hippie and I have a signed copy of Be Here Now. And I started hanging out with this guy, going when he was speaking and listening and trying to listen. The Eastern stuff was very attractive to me. It's the old hippie in me. You know, meditation kind of made sense. I wasn't doing much of it, but I thought it was cool. I'd be hip if I meditated, so I could pull that off, you know. And I was sitting with this Indian guru that my friend had attached himself to, and we heard him speak, and then we went into this back room of the place where he spoke, and the three of us were sitting there. And I was very impressed to be with him, so I'm talking away like I do, and this old man starts laughing at me, because that's what they do. They laugh at us. And I said, what are you laughing at? And he goes, I just love you alcoholics and drug addicts. And I said, why is that? He goes, the rest of them out there are trying to get awakened. You're just trying to figure out what the hell happened. Isn't that true? What the hell happened? What are we doing here? Talking about this. It wasn't supposed to be like this, I don't think. I never imagined anything like this. And here I am. Here I am. Here we are. You know, that's a spiritual experience. People pay good money for this stuff. It just happens to us. And the rest of the journey is trying to figure it out. You know, trying to get close to whatever that was, whatever it might be that changed the course of our lives. And those of us that have been around a while and work with people, we see it happen to other people right in front of us. You stop and think about it. You and I are in an organization where people's lives are saved every day. Every day here, people's lives are saved. And the mechanism that's used for that is us. It's us. The losers. It's us. I did that inventory and I started making some amends after that. And at a year sober, I started sponsoring people. And that's been the journey for 40 years. over and over again. So just before the pandemic, the last place I flew to was Sonoma in Northern California to speak at a men's banquet. And this old guy picks me up, and he's about my age, and he picks me up at the airport and he's driving me to this event. And in the car, he asked me how long I'd been sober, and I told him. And he said, "Well, I almost had 30 years." So you knew it was going to be an interesting conversation. And he told the story of being sober a long time, met his wife in AA, they got married, he's coming up on retirement. Life's good. Life's good. There's no big problems or anything. And he's resting on his laurels. You know, he's just kind of coasting along. He's not drifted completely away. He's going to meetings and stuff. He had a surgery and they gave him some pain medication. He took a couple extra pills and he started drinking again. It's not an uncommon story. And it really got my attention. And at the time he's telling me this story, he's 2 years sober again. He's got a commitment. He's just driving the speaker around. You know, he's back in AA. He didn't burn his whole life to the ground, but it wasn't pretty. And that night he was my host. We sat at the same banquet table at this banquet thing and we talked more about it. And it was like listening to myself, you know. I got back to LA and I called my sponsor, Jay, and I said, "Jay, how come you and I are still here?" And as he does every once in a while, he came up with a really interesting response. He said, "You and I have never lost our enthusiasm for it." Why is that? I don't know. That's another lucky thing. I've never lost my enthusiasm for you. I mean, you have pissed me off. Don't get me wrong. I don't get the respect I deserve on a regular basis, you know. You misbehave. This is a character defect center of the known universe, you know. So I've had trials and tribulations in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I've never lost my enthusiasm for it. One night I was so pissed off, one of you pissed me off, and I stormed out of the club and I'm heading for my car. And I stopped in the middle of the parking lot and said to myself, I think out loud, "Where are you going, Bill? Where are you going to go? Where are you headed?" And I just turned around and walked back in, you know. There's nowhere else to go. So after that experience and talking to my sponsor, I made some note. The pandemic hits, and all of a sudden we're in our underwear going to 10 meetings a day, right? You know, my men's stag, the Hermosa Beach men's stag, where the men are men and the sheep are nervous. You know, we got on the internet right away and we're sitting there and, you know, wasn't it awful when the pandemic was over and you had to get dressed and get in your car and drive all the way down to that place and go to the goddamn meeting, you know? That was a transition too, wasn't it? You know, and I've got shorts on right now. It's like, you know, and anyway, I made some notes. I wrote some stuff down. I really started thinking because it says what it says in our book on page 85, I believe it is, in the 10th step, it says, the only thing that's going to save us is the maintenance of our spiritual condition, right? So I'm looking at my spiritual condition. I go, what is that? Do I have one? That's a good question to ask yourself from time to time. Do I have one? If I have one, how did I get it? What's it made up of? Now we can talk about the mechanics of the steps, which is interesting, you know, how you do an inventory and why and all of this stuff. And there's manuals and handbooks, you know, turning the statements into questions. And, you know, there are people in AA that are doing inventory after inventory after inventory after inventory. And I ask those people, aren't you sick of yourself? You know, God, there's no stone left unturned. You know, I find you a lot more interesting than me. And I think the goal is to get out of self, isn't it? Not more into it. You know, it's not about analysis, it's about transformation. So I made some notes. You know, when this guy sat me down in his living room, I had a real experience going through the steps with this man. This was a new experience for me. And the very first thing that he wanted to know from me is whether I thought I was powerless over drugs and alcohol. For me, that was an easy question because I was pooped. And I could say that very openly. Yes, I'm powerless. I can't stop. And I got that. Well, 40 years later, I think it's everything, don't you? I don't think it's just drugs and alcohol. I don't think lack of power is my dilemma. My real dilemma is I keep thinking I have some power and I keep asserting myself and life's simply unfolding right in front of me, right? The best I can hope for is enough self-awareness to take advantage of what's being presented. and then take that ball and run with it. But I am not the author of my life. I mean, I talk to you incessantly about how if you were a little bit different, the two of us would be a hell of a lot happier. And you absolutely insist upon living your own life, and it pisses me off at my core. I've lost complete control over the geopolitical situation in the world. Look at it. You know, no one from Washington's ever called me up and said, Bill, what do you think should be happening here? That just like never happens, you know? And I live my life thinking that things outside myself need to be different in order for me to be okay. And I don't know about you, but it don't work like that, you know? Things outside myself are just as they are. And I have trouble with that. And I'm angry and I'm pissed off, but I'm powerless. So the first pillar of spiritual condition is powerlessness. That's a big concept. It's a lot more than just drugs and alcohol. As the years go by, I don't know about you, but I've done inventory on other shit that I'm having trouble with in my life. You know, this spiritual condition that it talks about, if I'm a newcomer in AA, I have a job, and that job is to get one of those. I need to get a spiritual condition, and this is not going to happen overnight. These 12 steps will generate one within me, but it's going to take some time, isn't it? It's not going to happen right away. And I need to generate the spiritual condition. It also says in that same paragraph that we're going to rest on these things called laurels, and we shouldn't do that, right? What the hell's a laurel? Well, one definition of a laurel is a past achievement. I didn't have any past achievements. It's like I had nothing to rest on. But it seems to me, in my experience has been, if I work these steps, if I get involved in AA, I will generate some laurels. I'll accomplish some things. I'll get some commitments. I'll help some people. Something will happen. So that later on down the road, I can rest on these laurels that I now have and find out why that's not a good idea, right? So this whole thing is experiential, isn't it? The only way I'm going to grow up, because what I suffer from, I don't have alcoholic thinking. I'm emotionally immature, and I look like I'm grown up, but on a good day, I've got the development of a rather disturbed 16-year-old. This kid was not an honor student. I was 8 years sober. I got escorted off a soccer field full of 9-year-olds for going after the referee. And my son was on that team. And when they're escorting you off the soccer field, when you're 8 years old, 8 years sober, you know you screwed up again. And that life has been a series of those things that now I'm going to learn from the experience. I'm going to grow up now, and I'm late. I'm late, you know. So powerlessness. And the second step says that this God thing, which I don't believe in, is going to restore me to sanity. Well, I hope so, right? You know, what do you need? What about the God thing? Some people say you got to have a God. No, you don't. All you got to know is it's not you. That's it. Wilson wrote extensively about this, about having an open mind, because my way hasn't been working. My sponsor told me one time when I was arguing with him about the God thing, he says, Bill, we don't need you here. You need us. Resign from the debating society. I left his house that night thinking, this is not therapy. This guy is not interested in how I feel. He's only interested in how I behave. Isn't that true about us? My feelings are as irrational as my thinking. You know, I'm run by the egoic mind. All I need to know about God is it's not me. Then the third step happens. The third step's interesting. The third step says, I'm going to make a decision to turn my life and will over to clearly what already has it anyway. Right? I think it's nice of them to lead me to believe that I actually have some say in the matter. Well, I've been withholding myself from the totality of all things long enough. I'm going to acquiesce now and allow you to take me. Thank you very much. Where's my trophy? Right? And we have these long-winded discussions about the difference between my will and God's will. My little ego that presented itself at 2.5 years old, just like yours, loves the idea of us having a battle of wills with the power that drives the entire universe. I don't think there's any difference between my will and God's will. I think, you know what God's will is? Because we also do wonder what God's will is. God's will is what's happening right now. What else could it possibly be? And I don't like what's happening right now, so I'm going to talk about something else should be happening than what is. And there is no alternative. This is it. This is what we get. What life and will is it talking about in the third step? It's the inventory, isn't it? The end result of living a life with seeming power. I've got resentments, I've got fears, and I've gotten broken sexual relationships. And I make a list of that and I share it with this stranger. And what's the lesson in the inventory process? The second pillar of spiritual condition. The first one's powerlessness. The second pillar is I have to stop blaming other people and institutions for my problems. High school is over. It's time for little Bill to start taking responsibility for his own life and stop the blaming, stop the crying about it, stop the victimhood. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And this is going to take a while because it's ingrained in my personality. The things that I hate, the things I don't like, the people that are responsible for me being in this situation. It's part of who I am. But I'm going to begin the process. And if I surround myself with some other healthy people in Alcoholics Anonymous, they will help me stop doing this. We help each other stop doing it. It's going to take a while. And then we get to the amends process. And these people that I'm pissed off at, you want me to go to them and make amends as a mechanism for ridding myself of these resentments. I am not doing that. I just want to forget the old life and move on with it. But we don't do that here. We go back and clean it up. This is where the transformation starts. This is where it really begins. This is what really separates the men from the boys, the girls from the women. This is the big one. This is the big one. This is where people deviate. They wander off, inventory too, but in the amends process especially. When I go to somebody that I don't ever want to see again and I say the words that need to be said, when I turn and walk away from that experience, I am changed right then and there. No waiting. This is a cathartic experience. The action of doing that will change who I am. It'll change who I am. And the lesson in the amends process is a big one. The third pillar of spiritual condition. Nothing was ever personal. But boy, it sure seemed personal, didn't it? That's a hard one to wrap your head around. Nothing was personal. People are just doing what they do, and I happen to be in the blast radius of their behavior. And sometimes you're in my blast radius. I'm not focused on you. I'm just doing what I do. This changes the story that we've been telling, not the events specifically. It doesn't mean the other people are innocent, but I have to be responsible for my own emotional state and my behavior. And when I start making the amends, I realize the story isn't true. The story I've been telling isn't true. Now, when these three things come together, I'm powerless, nothing. I got to stop the blaming, and I'm working on it. And then I begin to realize that nothing was personal. Nobody was focused on me. This was the collapse of the egoic structure of who I think I am. This is my personality falling apart. This is not necessarily a happy moment. You reach the point in this path where you realize, oh my God, I am the source of all the chaos in my life. It's me. It was never them. And I can tell you that kind of self-awareness without humor is depression. Sometimes the appropriate emotional response is depression. All right? It's not a disease in and of itself. I'm depressing, When you finally see that, when it finally starts to happen, when you finally can see it, this is a big moment. Now, 1 through 9 is about 10% of the program. It's not the work. It's Sober 101. It's the bare minimum. It's the first semester. It's what we have to do to develop a message of depth and weight that we can then begin the real work. And the real work in AA is 10, 11, and 12. It's 90% of the program. It's where we live. It incorporates all the other steps. It's a continuing process. The 10th step is the fourth pillar. The fourth pillar is self-awareness as compared to self-obsession, where I can actually watch myself move through life. I develop the skill of the watcher. It's different than being obsessed about what's going on with me and how I feel. It's being able to see what it is I do that stands in my own way. In meditation, I can watch myself think. I can sit quietly and focus my mind on the breath. And the egoic mind, the thinking mind, the operational mind that carries within it the persona that I'm defending and protecting, the way I want to be perceived, who I think I am. Back on the street, I was the phony biker with a clip-on earring. It's like, that's a persona. My biker nickname was Horny. I have it tattooed on my arm and it's misspelled. It's Horney, Horny, with an exclamation mark for emphasis. That was my persona then. My persona in Alcoholics Anonymous became Bill C., the AA guru. It's another persona, a little healthier, but all the same, a persona. And at 10 years sober, my life collapsed. I'm cheating on my wife. I blew up my family. I ended up living in a storeroom over my office in El Segundo. Now, when that happens to you, when you're 10 years sober, who do you blame? God knows we try, don't we? We try, but there's no one to blame. This is what's called a second surrender. They don't tell you about the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one, because it keeps happening. Ego death is long and exhausting, but I can finally see what it is I do that stands in the way of my own happiness. But in the meditation practice, I can focus my mind on the breath, and the egoic mind, the thinking mind, doesn't like being in the present moment. There's nothing for it to do. It wants to be in the future or in the past where it can actually work on stuff. And it'll wander away from the breath, and you notice that it has wandered away. And you gently bring it back to the breath. This is absolute conclusive proof experientially that the essence of my being is not my thinking mind. If it was, I couldn't catch it. So what is it within me that's able to see this one operate? What is that? Interesting, isn't it? This is a game-changing experience. This is self-awareness. The watcher is a real thing. There seems to be a consciousness within me that can watch the other one operate. If that's true, and at 20 years sober, this became real to me when I started getting real sick with liver disease. 8 years ago, February, I had a liver transplant. I almost died at 30 years sober. And I got really sick and I needed some real spiritual help. And I started meditating with real intent that I need some help. I knew I couldn't change the situation, but I needed to be peaceful inside, peace in the eye of the storm. And I had this real live experience of being this watcher. If it's true that I have this within me, then I don't necessarily have to go where this other one wants to take me. I don't have to go into the darkness and live in the past. I don't have to suffer from anxiety. I can come back to the present moment. If you meditate enough, the present moment has a texture and a feel to it. And once you know where that is, you can return to it at will, because now you know where it is. And the more you do it, the watcher becomes a louder voice in the committee. Self-awareness is everything. Without it, I can't change. If I can't see it, I can't change it. Self-awareness. And the final pillar is the fifth pillar is a big one. It's the part of us that's missing. What's missing in selfish and self-centered people, young or sober, it's not just alcoholics. What's missing is compassion. I don't have compassion. I can't feel you in my life. Now you're in my life, but at some point someone will stand in front of you, a loved one that's close to you, and somehow he or she will say, "You are not emotionally available for me." And my response is, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm standing right here. I don't get it." And when they say that to us, and we're 8 or 10 years, however long sober we are, we're not newcomers now. We've been around a while. We're supposed to be better, and we get hit with this. This happened to me. And I don't get it. And what they're saying when they say that, they believe that I have something and I'm withholding it. But the truth is worse. I don't have it. And I don't know that I don't have it. You have convinced me that I've got it, and I'm helping you look for it. And this dance is going to go on forever. And if all I do is go to 875,000 meetings, nothing will ever change. This is internal work. How do we learn compassion? If I can't feel you, and I don't know that, I've never had compassion, so how would I know that anything was missing? I can see the character defects. I might have them, but I'm not stupid. I know that I'm arrogant and I'm pompous. I get it. I can see that. But what about stuff that never developed in me? And I believe the mechanism that Alcoholics Anonymous uses to bring about compassion in these selfish, self-centered people is sponsorship. There's a difference between activity and action. And what that man did for me, and I had no idea this was going on. I don't know that he even knew it. When he invited me alone in his living room, this was a very intimate act. I was very uncomfortable with this. A lot of people don't sponsor because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable sometimes. It's inconvenient for sure. I mean, you are incredibly inconvenient. And evidently, I need to be inconvenienced in order for my life to change. If I stay comfortable all the time, nothing changes. And you disrupt my life. When you come into my life, it disrupts everything. I'm dying from liver disease, and one of my guys would call me up and say, Bill, how you doing? And I start telling him, and he interrupts me and starts talking about himself. Now I'm not in self-pity anymore. Now I've got a resentment against that bastard. He doesn't really care about me, right? That's an upgrade, you know? And yeah. When I sit with somebody when every time somebody comes and does the fifth step with me, it's a stunning experience. He trusted me like I trusted that man. Am I trustworthy? Can I keep someone's secrets? And I learned that about myself. Can I? You know? I'm old enough now to where I'm a father figure to people. I didn't know that was going to happen. But these people come from alcoholic homes. Maybe they've never had a father or they didn't have a good one. And they trust me and I can feel them trust me. Am I trustworthy? And I've learned over the years, yes, I can do this. I can be that for that guy. And then they grow up and leave home just like real kids do. And I get butthurt, you know? It's like, it's an emotional reaction and it's exercising that compassion muscle. Now, the first 10 years I was in AA, I wanted to sponsor you. I'm looking for devotees. I'm trying to make a name for myself in an anonymous organization, right? So I went from the phony biker to the phony AA guru. And was it real? Well, it's a little healthier, but that's what I'm looking for. It didn't matter what my motivation was for why I was doing it. I did the work and it did me. And what happened is I fell in love with you. I started really caring about you. You can't be connected to people like that and not really care. You lose a couple of people that go out and drink and die. It breaks your heart. You can't truly love until your heart's been broken. That's happened to me many times over the years. But conversely, on the other side, I've got men that have been with me for over 30, 35 years. You know, they're like family. I have men that I sponsor that I read inventory to because I trust them to break down the hierarchy. There's no hierarchy in Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought there was. And I worked my way up into the hierarchy. You know what you find when you get there? The people you think are in the hierarchy are laughing at you because they know you think they're the hierarchy, because that's what they thought. And when you get there, you realize there is no hierarchy in Alcoholics Anonymous. We are all in this together. This is who we are. This is family. This is real family. Real family. A loving family, a caring family. Does it have discord? Of course it does. Of course we do. My sponsor, I've had the same sponsor for 40 years. What do you suppose I learned from that? I learned that there can be conflict in a relationship, and that does not mean the relationship is over. We've worked through some of that stuff. Him and I both joke that we're the longest relationship either one of us has ever had. This is kind of sad when you think about it, you know? But I'll leave you with this thought. I know I'm running over. I get a little excited, as you can tell. They say around here you got to give it away to keep it. No, that's not true. You have to give it away to get it. That's how you get it, is by giving it away. Thanks for letting me share with you.